Well, continuing the thread here on the show that we begun quite some time ago, the issue of censorship and dealing with it. And there's a merger of another issue which I think is important, and that is the use of Bitcoin, because both the European Central Bank and our Treasury Secretary and former Fed Chair Janet Yellen have come out and said we need to, A, think about a digital currency for the U.S., and Europe is thinking about the same thing for Europe, but B, we have to get this Bitcoin under control because, why, gee golly willikers, we can't control it. And, government people can't resist doing that. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Steel on Steel, taking the 30,000-foot view in economics, politics, and religion from a worldview perspective. John Loeffler here, Steve Schiller producing. Andrea O'Sullivan wrote a really interesting article that I thought was really terrific. It came out in Reason magazine, which is great. I go there regularly to see who's writing what. The best way for Florida to take on big tech is to keep welcoming the crypto community, ostensibly from California. Andrea is director of the Center for Technology and Innovation at the James Madison Institute, which is a free market think tank in Florida. And her work focuses on cybersecurity, surveillance, etc. And she's a number of books we'll talk about later that she's authored. I was really interested to see this combination. There seems to be a large Bitcoin community relocating to Florida. Why so? And then how would that affect censorship? Because you're saying this might be the solution to it.
Sure. So I think there's a couple of reasons that people are moving to Florida. First of all, Florida is just a fantastic state, right? We're beautiful. We have great weather. And more importantly, maybe we have a great system of government here. So we have a very low and reasonable system of taxation. In fact, we have no state income tax whatsoever. We have a pretty reasonable budget. It's well managed. We score very well government fiscal management. The quality of services that we get is quite high. Our roads are very good. Our schools are very good. We have a lot of educational options. Our universities are very good. You're getting a lot of bang for the buck when you move here. So if you're a high-skilled, technologist, or perhaps you work in finance in New York, and you've suffered this past year in California or New York or New Jersey under this crazy system of taxation and these crazy lockdowns, you can move anywhere you'd like. Of course, Florida is going to be on the top of your list, right? And we're very happy to have them. We welcome them here, and we just ask that they remember why they moved here in the first place. It's that Florida has a very good system of government. We want to keep it that way, and we want to make sure that more people can come and build and do all the great things that makes Florida great.
Funny the way you said that. We've been saying the same thing here in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, is we live here because we like it. Please don't bring there here.
Right, exactly. We say, don't New York or Florida, right? And I know other states across the country are having that similar kind of dynamic, right, where you're welcoming people who want to move to your state, but also, you want to remind them, like, you moved here for a reason. When it comes to technologists, Florida has made a couple of policy decisions that make it even more attractive. So one thing that the Florida government did in 2019 is pass what's called a regulatory sandbox for financial technology firms, or fintech. This includes things like cryptocurrency, but it also includes things like, maybe I should bring this up right now, but Robinhood, right? Square, Cash, Venmo, these kinds of technology-enabled financial applications that expand access to people who are maybe underbanked or who just prefer a technological way to send money. So what a regulatory sandbox is a stripped-down environment where startups can come, they can offer their products directly to consumers under the watch of regulators without all the crazy licensing and tax and fee schemes that big banks can handle, but startups can't. So that's great. And then we've also seen leaders like specifically Mayor Francis Suarez of Miami specifically kind of courting the Bitcoin and cryptocurrency community, saying, hey, come here and build. We want you here. We want to pass our laws so that it makes it easier for you to build. Let's do something great together. So we are seeing a big influx of people from these communities specifically to come to Florida and build, which is great. And when people talk to me about technology in Florida, they say, oh, why does your government hate technology? And I say, well, no, they don't hate technology at all, right? They might have some problems with a couple of ways that certain companies are run, right? Big tech, right? Platforms. And I say, actually, what the Florida government is doing to attract these Bitcoin and cryptocurrency communities is exactly the solution to some of these problems with big tech. The reason is Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, these kinds of technologies are decentralized. They allow people to connect directly online, whereas these platforms are centralized. And you have a central administrator that sets the rules for everybody. If you don't like the rules, too bad, you're kicked off. And what we're seeing is people who are building these decentralized technologies, they're applying it to social media. So you can, again, connect directly without the need to worry about these moderators or these administrators or even governments that might have influence being able to tell you what you can and cannot do with your own computer.
It's interesting because at some point, I'm not sure if states are going to be able to come to grips with this. We know countries are trying. Australia has been in a major spat with some of the social media groups, as well as Poland. Some of these countries are recognizing, wait a minute, this censorship is really bad for everybody, and these companies are actually manipulating elections. So we're not the only ones that seem to have this issue. As a matter of fact, I think the world leaders have figured out if cancel culture can cancel President Trump off social media, wow, we could get canceled off too.
Right, that's exactly right. And that's a risk anytime you have, again, that centralized model. So Australia and Poland are interesting case studies because they are recognizing the problem, but their solutions, they assume that this centralized model will continue. But it's going to continue to be a problem for as long as that's the dominant computing paradigm. What's more interesting to me is looking at EU countries like Germany and France. They are no friends of big tech, right? They issue their own share of regulations as well. But what they do is they specifically offer funding and support for some of these decentralized technologies that route around the problem. So one great example is called the Matrix Protocol. It is a totally decentralized communications app. So people who are worried about censorship on things like WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger, they'll download something like the Matrix Protocol or a related service called Element, where you don't have to worry about that. So it's great for governments that are worried about these things. Rather than trying to regulate platforms the way they want, they can give money to these open source projects to develop the tools that route around it.
Yeah, because the other problem you have is, say you regulate the social platforms, you have to have rules about who gets deplatformed and when and where, and then you have appeals processes and all this other nonsense. The other thing, by the way, that these social platforms are doing as far as economics and business, if you create an online business that's almost totally dependent upon them, you've worked at it, it's now become profitable, bang, bang, suddenly some techie somewhere decides you're in violation of these vague community standards, you're out. I mean, that's just it. They just try. We can't do business like this, Andrea.
No, and there's not a lot of recourse, and it's not even, the political ones get the most coverage for obvious reasons, right? If you say something that some perhaps left-leaning person in California doesn't like, and that gets the headlines. But a lot of small businesses, let's say they get your phone number wrong on the Google card when you search for the business. Well, that's going to really affect your business. People are calling the wrong number. They're like, wow, this is a horrible business. They don't pick up. And that affects your reputation. And small business owners, when you call Google, you can't get somebody on the phone a lot of the time. It's very difficult. And this is something very prosaic. Google's not being malicious per se in this situation. It's just very hard to run a billion user plus global platform. But it's a problem. Users don't have a lot of recourse. They don't have a lot of accountability. And that all depends on the quality of a central administrator that's running that platform.
Yeah, ironically, the advantage of what you are speaking is also what's beginning to drive the treasury departments and central banks of various countries crazy because they can't control it. It's decentralized, and they're trying to figure out how you get a handle on this type of thing. Ostensibly, too, because there is some illegal activity going on. It's a great way to launder money if you need to.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Anytime you have something out of government's control, they're not going to like that, right? And you're exactly right. We see central banks and different regulators all across the world get their hands around the cryptocurrency kind of community. It's a fool's errand. You're never going to be able to do that, right? As country after country has learned, you really shouldn't fight cryptocurrency. You should try to work with it. It's true that you can commit crimes using cryptocurrency, just like people commit crimes using the internet, and we wouldn't say, hey, let's shut down the internet. The interesting thing about cryptocurrency in particular, especially when you compare it to something like physical cash, the US dollar, is that blockchain leaves a uncensorable record of all transactions for all time. Bitcoin operates this way. So if you're concerned about things like crime, you might actually encourage the use of blockchain cryptocurrencies because it provides the means for forensic analysis in a way that a lot of physical cash transactions do not. And in fact, that's the way that a lot of the crimes that you've heard about using cryptocurrency, that's how law enforcement is able to track it because they're doing blockchain forensics.
Yeah. So what Florida is trying to do is make it friendly for the Bitcoin people and is moving in a direction of requiring certain things for online platforms, etc., which could also be problematical. Say all the states started to do that instead of the federal government. Well, jeepers, that creates a patchwork quilt of what you can and can't do.
Yeah, it's really difficult for interoperability, first of all. But more importantly, I mean, these platforms don't really need to operate anywhere. So you brought up Australia earlier, and there's a big controversy there about what's being called a link tax for media providers, that any time that a news link is posted to Facebook, Facebook would have to pay a certain amount to that news provider to recuperate on lost advertising costs. And Facebook said, okay, well, we're just not going to allow any links from Australia news then. It's well within Facebook's rights to say, well, if this state has these unworkable rules, then we're going to limit the functionality of people in that state. And people would be upset, right? People complain a lot about social media, but they often don't leave, right? It takes a lot for people to leave. So that has to be a consideration, too, of anybody who's thinking about how can I solve the problems that my citizens have, which is they want to connect with people online. If these political solutions don't bring the results you want, then it's time to start looking at technological solutions like decentralized platforms.
And let them compete. It's the same deal.
Exactly. Yep.
Which is the problem that you have when you have too few providers in the mix. So, well, anyway, I think you've done a good job in terms of covering all of this, because I've been curious as to where Bitcoin goes. Along with the internet, having covered government as long as I have, when something new comes out, it's like, okay, the clock is ticking. How long before they won't be able to keep their paws off it? Especially if there's tax money in there.
That's right. This is something that the Bitcoin community has been aware of for a long time. In fact, in 2010, WikiLeaks wanted to use Bitcoin for donations, right? They were being deplatformed by credit card providers and payment processors. And the creator of Bitcoin, Satoshi Nakamoto, actually asked Julian Assange to kind of hold off for a little bit because he was worried that it would attract too much government attention while the network was still so small. So the upshot is, over a decade later, the network is quite large, it's quite powerful, and there's quite a bit of money behind it. So it's going to be harder and harder all the time for governments to fatally wound the network, if you will. So that is the good news.
That is. Well, I think there's going to be enough pressure at some point to say the social media groups, whether we want to stay with that or not remains to be seen, or will it go in the direction you're saying. But they've been playing a double game here, and the double game is they say, oh, no, we're just a common carrier, so therefore we shouldn't be subject to lawsuits or various types of regulation. But when it's convenient, then they become publishers because they're making editorial decisions, and they jump back and forth. Okay, and the question is, well, which one is it?
Yep.
And then you're right, because even if you have rights of appeal, oh my gosh, can you see everybody trying to go through appeals processes for deplatforming and everything? All of that's got to go. It's just too much.
Yep, and that's another reason that decentralized solutions really are the way. So it's not just Republicans that are mad at these platforms. Democrats want to remove these protections for platforms for their own reasons. When you have a decentralized model where you don't have anyone who could take down the content, even if they wanted to, then Section 230, these liability controls, those become irrelevant. So it seems kind of a foregone conclusion that this is where the industry has to move.
Okay, Andrea O'Sullivan, Director of the Center for Technology and Innovation at the James Madison Institute. Any websites, blogs, or books you would like people to know about?
Sure. So I would just encourage people to check out my work at the James Madison Institute. If you're interested in Bitcoin specifically, I co-authored a book with Jerry Brito called Bitcoin, a Primer for Policymakers. It does a really good job of outlining how these technologies work and some of the policy implications that are created by this new technological design.
I do thank you for your time. Looking forward with enthusiasm to whither this goes. So enjoy your coming hurricane season in Florida.
That's right. Well, thank you for having me.
Think, having lived in California, what the people do is they swap earthquakes for hurricanes.
That's right.
All right. The most interesting thing about this concept is that if social media exchanges would go to a blockchain type of technology, which the cryptocurrencies are using, then the whole platform wouldn't be a platform like on one person's main server. It would be decentralized throughout the internet. And because of encryption methods as well, very, very difficult for governments or any other private group to control. It would be the best of free speech, to be honest with you. Now, there are pitfalls in that. People could use it for bad things, and they would be able to exchange messages, etc., without necessarily being tracked by government agencies who might wish to do so. They have recognized this at the same time, by the way, because our new Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, formerly chair of the Federal Reserve, I always used to say, let's see what Janet's yelling about this week. She has said, well, we need to get this under control. Well, good luck with that. because it's a question of the gazintas and the gazoutas and where you tap into the whole issue of Bitcoin and some of the other cryptocurrencies. At the very same time, they realize that they're losing control of currency worldwide, the central banks. So the central banks want to get that under control. The taxation agencies want to get that under control in various countries. And it's going to be interesting to watch them do that. But I knew they were going to do it. You just knew they were going to have to do it. Couldn't keep their little furry paws off of that whole thing. But a social platform system that operates with blockchain technology would be an interesting comment. And I'm sure that's going to emerge, because back in the day when I was growing up into media and things, Buckminster Fuller, the futurist, once made a comment: you never change things by fighting the existing reality. And I thought that was a brilliant insight, because people waste a lot of time trying to push back on it. He said what you do is you build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete, and things will just naturally go in that direction. And it doesn't make any difference how much pressure is being applied by the people who control the old technology. People will go to the new technology. He's not off the mark here. This might actually work. Okay, that's it for today. We just thought we'd continue this thread on privacy and security on the internet. Florida is trying to address that. Let's see what other states do. Do pray for us for provision and protection. Pray for those suffering for their faith around the world, and pray for those in charge of your own particular governments at all different levels. On behalf of producer Steve Schiller, I'm John Loeffler. We're at SteelOnSteel.com. The program is Steel on Steel.